Hey everybody, my name's Devin, and I'm the youth pastor at a church in Calgary, Alberta called Bethany Chapel. And we are several weeks into our social distancing, into a whole different lifestyle than normal for us now, because I feel like after a few weeks we are starting to settle into a normal, but a normal for us now is very different than what we're used to. It's very different than what we're comfortable with. And as I've been working through this, I have really missed just being able to share God's word. So I thought I would take some time to share some of God's word with you guys, whoever's watching, whoever's listening. Thank you for taking the time. And I'm going to actually be jumping into a series that I was working through with my youth group. And now I know you're probably thinking, well, if it was for a youth group, it's just for teens. And yes, the main focus of this will be towards the teen audience or towards people who are younger than me. But there's truth in every message of God. There's truth in all the scripture that all of us can learn from, all of us can grow from. And so I hope that if you're older or you don't identify as a teen anymore, that this will still be something that you'd be willing to check out and listen. And I'm going to be prepping these. I'm going to try and do one every week and just kind of throw them up for people to watch, for people to learn from, for people to grow from. And I hope that what I've prepared and what God has laid on my heart will be able to help and benefit you as you grow in your faith or as you check out God out of curiosity. So before this pandemic stepped into play, before what we knew as normal changed, I was working through a series with the youth group called Weird Stories, Real Truth. And the point of this series was to look at some of the more weird stories in the Bible and to pull out the truth and life application in it, because there is some stuff that kind of leaves you going like, what? How did that happen? Or why did that happen? And there's parts of it that we can still take today and still apply, even though these are the more bizarre situations. These aren't things that happen to everyday God believers, everyday Christians, but there's still good truth and good lessons we can pull out of it and help us be better Christ followers today. So the passage we're going to actually be looking at is in the book of Daniel, which is an Old Testament book, which means that it was written before Jesus came and before Jesus died. And so we have to do a little bit of work to understand it fully, because there's some things that are old covenant out of it and that kind of stuff. And I know I might have lost some of you with the word covenant, but covenant basically means promise. So in the old covenant, in the old promise, there was the law and a bunch of rules when it came to following God. And then in the new covenant or the new promise, we have salvation through Jesus and faith in his sacrifice. And so there's a little bit of work to kind of get through that, but I'll help you with that and I'll work us through that as we look at this story together. So I'm going to do two Weird Story, Real Truth messages, this one today, one next week. And then from there, we're going to hop into a series on the book of Philippians, and we're gonna just be kind of working through that chunk by chunk and pulling out some really good life application out of it, because there's some really awesome stuff in the book of Philippians. So for today, we're gonna be focusing on the book of Daniel, like I said, and we're gonna be learning about a topic of burning hot faith. But before we dig into the actual story itself, I have a couple of questions for you. And these are just ones I want you to sit down and think about, and then we'll move on together. So first question is, have you ever believed in something so deeply that you'd be willing to face death for it? Something you're like, I believe in this cause so much, or I believe in this idea so much that I'd be willing to die for it. Maybe that's too extreme. What about this? If you ever believed in something so wholeheartedly that you'd be willing to lose all credibility for it? Your social status, your intelligence, people might look at you and go, wow, that's crazy. Why would they do that? Something along those lines. Maybe again, that might be too extreme, but the story we're going to be looking at has three people that experienced both of these things. They experienced the chance of completely losing their credibility. They experienced the chance of facing death, and you'll know more of that as we dig into it. Now, for those of you that know the Bible, we're going to be looking at the story of Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego in the book of Daniel in Daniel chapter 3, in the beginning of chapter 4. But for those of you that don't know, I'll kind of give a little bit of the context of what's going on. So to set the scene, you need to know that King Nebuchadnezzar has overpowered the city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is where God's people were living, or a portion of them were living. So he came in with his soldiers, won over the area, and then left them where they were, but like now they're a part of the Babylonian kingdom. And he said, you guys are going to stay there. You're going to keep functioning. You're going to keep doing your stuff. And then I'm sure there was taxes and that kind of stuff that went into play for that. But so they got to stay where they were, but had to then but then they have to follow the Babylonian rules and come under what King Nebuchadnezzar wanted. And one of the acts that he did as soon as he took the kingdom is he sent one of his servants to that kingdom and said, all right, go to Jerusalem, find some people, add them to my court, make them people who are going to follow me, make them servants of me, make them people that are going to do what I want. And so he's like kind of adding them as servants, but also adding them as people, as advisors to his court, so he can expand and learn and grow and get their perspective and get their religion in on what he's kind of figuring out in the decisions that he is making. Pretty interesting, pretty smart. As you expand your kingdom, you should expand your circle of wisdom. So this servant goes out and he grabs a bunch of people from Jerusalem and brings them straight to Babylon to be with King Nebuchadnezzar. And one of them is Daniel, who the book is based off of. Now, it's important to note that after Daniel joined, that King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream and he was trying to understand it. So he reached out to like all of his sorcerers, all of his mystics, all the people that he's just like, these guys, that they can see the unseeable, they can reach into the unreachable. And I'm going to have them try to interpret this dream, because he had this dream, it was troubling him. And they all tried, they all failed. And then Daniel came along and Daniel's like, well, God will help me interpret this. And he was able to interpret the dream through God's guidance, through God's help, and he got promoted and became someone of importance, became someone of seniority in Babylon, which is pretty cool. And the important thing to note through all that is, even though Daniel is in Babylon, and in Babylon there's tons of gods for people to follow. And when I say gods, I mean like the lowercase g gods, because I'm also going to call the God that I believe in, the God that Daniel believed in, God as well. But it's a capital G God instead of a lowercase g. But there's tons of idols, there's tons of other gods, there's lots of things that Daniel could have turned and worshipped. But throughout all of that, he remained faithful to the king, but more importantly, he remained faithful to God. And when Daniel was promoted, he brought 3 people from Jerusalem that came along with them into the promotion. Now, they didn't get put up as highly as Daniel did, but they had a position of authority. They had a seat on the council, and these are the guys named Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. And these guys are what this story is actually about. So this is after Daniel got his promotion, after these guys were put into a position of higher power and had a seat on the council with the king. Now that we understand that, we're going to set the scene of what's happening right before we start reading. So the actual story goes from all of chapter 3 and the beginning of chapter 4, which is a lot of reading, and I don't want to just sit there and read it to you. So I'm going to kind of tell the story as it goes, and we're going to hop into actual Bible passages for the more important parts that are coming along. So Nebuchadnezzar, after getting his newer council, after winning over Jerusalem, says, all right, I am going to build this magnificent idol for people to worship. And it was an idol of one of the gods that he worshiped, and he wanted people to worship it along with him. So he built it, and the Bible says that it was 60 cubits high and 60 cubits wide. Now, cubits were a different form of measurement, and you might not fully know what that looks like now. So a cubit was around 18 inches, so 1.5 feet. So he built something straight out of gold, 90 feet high, 90 feet wide approximately. So this thing was huge. And as the king put this together, he said, all right, I want to have a ceremony where everybody comes along, we do a grand unveiling, and everybody can see it. And a part of that ceremony were our friends, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. And I'm going to say their names a lot. And for some reason, when I was writing this message, I kept messing up Shadrach and saying Radshak. So if I ever say that, just leave a comment, be like, you said it wrong. It's Shadrach, ha ha ha, and kind of move on, or laugh with me as I trip over these intense names to share. But this wasn't just like a grand unveiling party. They also put a rule in place with this statue, with this idol. And the idol is what people would put as like a totem of a god, and they would say like, this is a representation of the god. When you see this, you are to worship it. And so Daniel 3 verse 4-6, as at this grand reveal, as they were showing off this idol or statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had made, from verses 4-6, I'm going to read it for you now. It says, and the herald proclaimed aloud, you are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music. You are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning, fiery furnace. So during this grand reveal, a new rule was shared. There will be times when music will be playing, and there's a variety of instruments it could come off of. And when that happens, they are to stop what they're to do, or what they're doing, and they are to engage and worship this idol and this idol alone. Now, I'm sure most of you are thinking, well, that's a little odd that King Nebuchadnezzar would ask that, but what's the big deal? Well, the big deal wasn't for most of the people, but it was a big deal for Daniel. And no, he's not mentioned in this story, but it would have been a big deal for him, but it also would have been a big deal for our main characters, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, because they believed in God. And I'm talking capital G God, not lowercase g God. And because they believed in capital G God, they committed their lives to worshiping him and him alone. That was a part of the promise that he made with his followers. He said, you will worship me and me alone and no other gods. So because they made that promise and they wanted to remain faithful, this idea of bowing down to this idol, bowing down to this other God, would actually damage their relationship with God. So this caused quite the dilemma for Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. And they were feeling this tension, they were feeling this frustration, and they wanted to know what to do. Do they continue to worship God that they believe in as the one and only true God, or do they throw that all aside to appease their king, who put in some very strict guidelines of if you do not do this, you're going to be thrown into a furnace, you're going to be burned, you're going to die. Well, to continue the story, they chose their God over their king. They did some deep soul searching and decided that worshiping God was more important to them than making their king happy, and more important to them than giving all of that up to worship another idol. So as time goes on, the music plays for them to worship. The music comes on, the idol's there, it's glistening in gold, and everybody's bowing down to it, but Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego continuously choose not to engage in worship. They remain standing, they keep doing what they're doing. They're not turning to the idol, they're not bowing, they're not worshiping it. Now, there was a group of people called the Chaldeans, and they were magicians and wise people that were also in the king's court. And they saw this happening time and time again, and they decided they wanted to earn some more favor, they wanted to get more respect in the king. So they went to the king and told on them. Basically, I imagine this as like a 2-year-old being like, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego are cheating. You know what I mean? Like, they're not following what we want. They're not doing what you're supposed to do. And they're trying to get them in trouble so they can get higher standings, so they can get higher respect, and so they can be seen as more important to the king. So the king hears this message, and he made it very clear. If you don't worship it, you're going to burn in the furnace. And that does not sound like a nice way to go by any means or any stretch. So he angrily calls Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego forward. And he says, guys, I've been hearing you're not worshiping. What's going on? But he gives them an out. He says, all right, you're not worshiping, but if you're ready to, I'll play the music right now. You bow down, and we can just move forward from this. And he's kind of giving them an out, but he's still mad. He's still going to follow through. So let's read what Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego said. Because in that moment, they could have just bowed. They could have just engaged. But instead, they do this. In Daniel's 3:16-18, it says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. So they see their easy out. They feel the conviction in their heart, and they're like, we're not going to step down. We're not going to engage in this. They actually say to the king, we don't even have to answer you in this matter. Now, that is like slapping a king in the face. This king brought them from their enslaved city to his court. They're in a position of power. They're people that are significant in the area. And they're just simply saying to him, we don't have to answer you. We're not going to engage in this conversation. Our God is big enough to handle this fiery furnace. In that moment, they chose worshiping their God and the chance of death over appeasing the king and making him happy. And I love this because it shows that they have so much faith in God that they know that even though fire kills people, even though fire hurts, even though it could cause them great, horrible pain, they know God is able to deliver them from it. But above and beyond that, because then they go on to say that even if God doesn't choose to save them, they are going to continue to worship him. And it's like they said, we don't have to answer you in this matter. And even if we die in this moment, we will never worship what you believe in. We will never engage in it because our God is more important to us than those things. I love that they take the time to say, even in this moment, if God doesn't save us, even in this moment, if we do die, they would rather still proclaim God than proclaim the greatness of anything else. Now, this was a very risky move, and the king was very mad. He was not okay with this. He was not happy about it, and he wanted to take vengeance. So he held true to what he said. He's like, I'm going to put them in the furnace. Now, before we do this, there's a couple of steps that the king took before putting them in the furnace. It's not like he's like, all right, in the furnace, and shoved them in. He actually took steps to make sure that there was no way these men would live. So the first thing he did is he turned it up 7 times hotter. Now, some would argue that the word 7 was just used as like a word of importance and that the furnace couldn't actually go 7 times hotter, but it meant that he cranked it on max. He made it as hot as he possibly could. And we know that is true because of what happens later on. But then second, he restrained Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. He tied them up. So not only were they bound, but they were also approaching the furnace when it was on max. It was cranking as hot as it possibly could be. And then third, the guards or the soldiers that the king used to put them in there, they actually burned up, bringing them towards the furnace. So he brought them to the furnace and they actually burned up from the heat coming off of it. So the doors opened, it's so hot, the soldiers die as they push them in. But in they go, they fall into the fire. Now let's read and see what happens next. Daniel 3 verse 24 to 25 says, Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? They answered and said to the king, True, O king. He answered and said, But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. So after watching the guards burn up, after watching them fall into the furnace, the king is watching from above. He's got a good view. He can see what happens. He wants to see these guys disappear in the flame. But as he's watching, as he's seeing, he sees something different. He sees that there is a 4th figure in there. They're all unbound, and they're walking in the fire like everything is fine. And he mentions that the 4th figure kind of looks like a god. Looks like the Son of God. Now, some scholars believe that this might mean that actually Jesus was there with them. Some scholars believe that it meant that there was an angel of God there present, and it was so majestic. It had that godly presence about it. Regardless of what you believe or where you come into that camp, the one truth we can pull out of it is that God was there with them. He sent help, and he took care of them in a situation where people were dying already just from being near the furnace. So they go into this fire that is so hot it should have incinerated them in a second, and nothing happens to them. In fact, they grow an extra person. God is with them. God is present. So then the king calls them out of the fire because clearly they're not burning. This room is swelteringly hot because the furnace is cranked up. And the king's probably sweating. The people around him, his council, they're probably also sweating. And they're all like, we just need to get out of this. We need to get the furnace back down to normal. So he calls Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego out. And out they come. And as they come out, they see that they are perfectly fine. There's no singe marks. There's no hurt. They didn't even get hurt when they fell into the furnace. It's like they came out just as good as they were when they came in before they were bound up. And the bindings are gone, but they didn't even smell like fire. I can't imagine a furnace smells good because there'd be a mix of oil and like wood and other things that are burning in there. And you'd have that like kind of smell, just like when you have a campfire, you have a campfire smell. But they didn't even smell like that. Now, because of their faith action that they took, God chose in that moment to save them. And as they came out, the king realized, ooh, I have made a mistake. I am worshiping the wrong God. And he actually then in chapter 4 proclaims to everyone what he had seen in that furnace room. And he actually then takes a section in chapter 4, verse 3, he takes a section and actually explains about how great the God that Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego is, and that people need to understand that he is great and that he is present. Now, this is quite the story, and I have some thoughts for us today because I've shared the story now, so I want to pull some application out of it for us. And I have a couple of points here for us. The first is God will stand with you in the midst of trouble. Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego very boldly claimed that God could deliver them. And they knew that coming out of it because they had the parts of the Old Testament with them. It was being shared through story. They had seen the miracles that God had performed, and they knew that God was capable of the impossible. So what they said is true. God could have saved them, and in the moment that he did. But they had so much faith in God, and they said, even if we die, we're going to choose to worship him. And that's such a powerful thing. But God was present with them in that fire. He was present with them in that moment of struggle. Now, for us, it doesn't mean when trouble comes, God's going to show up and be there as a being with us and help us. But it does teach us that God is able to do that, but also on top of that he will be there with you. He might bring people alongside you that help encourage you, that help support you. He might give you a word of comfort from the Bible, or he might bring like a good prayer to you, or he might just be listening to your prayer. So know that in the time of your struggle, God is there with you. He is listening, he cares, he loves you. And the thing I love about this is he didn't save them from being thrown in the fireplace, from the furnace, but he was there with them, and he helped them persevere, and he helped them get through, and he helped them overcome it. Second, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego remained faithful despite not knowing if God would rescue them. He had no idea if he was going to be rescued, or they had no idea if they were going to be rescued. They could have been thrown in that furnace, they could have burned up, and they would have been gone. But the thing was, they chose to worship God. They chose to remain faithful. They chose to say, God is super important, and we would rather worship him than ever dishonor and break that relationship with him. I think a lot of people today that choose to worship God, they do it situationally. They're like, oh, I'll worship God, I'll engage with him. But as soon as things get tough, it's God's fault that things went wrong. God never promises to save us from our problems. What he does promise is that we will learn from them, that we will grow from them, and that we will endure them. He'll bring people alongside to support us. He'll help us, but he's not going to save us from it. And I know for some people that in and of itself is enough to not want to engage with God. But for me, I would much rather face struggles in life because they come. I have had enough in my life alone to know that they come, they happen, and every time they're horrible. But I would rather face those struggles knowing that God is with me, that he is present, and that he's going to help me endure and learn and grow from it than just face a struggle and think life is out to get me. And the third point is that living out your faith affects others. This is a moment in history where if Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego chose not to continue to worship God, the king would never have gotten to truly experience God. But he had the experience with Daniel, and then he had the experience with Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, and it actually changed him a little bit. It impacted his life, and all they did was remain faithful to God. It's not like they shared the gospel. It's not like they got into an argument about whether God exists. All they did was live out their faith. And for us, that is a very true application. If you live out your faith, if you allow the love of God to pour out of you and just everything that you do, it will impact people. It will change people. You don't have to be good at it. You don't have to be able to articulate it. You just have to remain faithful and allow God to work in your life. And he will. And in ways that you never expected, in ways that you never thought possible. So if you're listening to this and you're a Christian, Let's follow the example of Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. Let's put our faith in God and in him alone. Let's trust him in the hard times, despite what the outcome might be. Whether it goes great or it goes horribly, let's trust him. And let's live out our faith in a way that other people can see it. Just let the love of God pour out of who you are and remain faithful. And if you do that, people will notice, people will ask, and they will see the love of God. And that is something that's truly and wonderful. And that is a goal of mine. And I know I don't do it perfectly. And I'm sure some of you are sitting there saying, I could love better. I could let God work on my life better. So let's be people that are devoted to that. But if you're watching this and you aren't a Christian, first of all, thanks for taking the time to listen to what I have to say and listen to God's word. I'm super glad that you're here and you're listening. But I have a question for you. What do you believe in? There's got to be something. You got to believe in something. Everyone does, whether it's nothing, whether it's the earth, whether it's spiritualness, whatever it is, other gods, other religions, like whatever it is, what do you believe in? And I would push you and challenge you to believe in something that you'd be willing to lose all credibility for, to believe in something that you'd be willing to die for. So it is my hope and my desire that you will believe in God. Because I truly believe that he is someone worth all of that devotion. He is worth believing in him. And if you want to talk more about that, I'm here. You can leave a comment. You can direct message me. You're going to see different social medias kind of popping up over here, I believe, or over here. I'm not sure what side I'm going to edit them on, but you can direct message me. You can chat with me. You can add it on. I would love to talk to you about what it means to believe in God, because he is the one true being that is worth fully devoting your life to. He is worth losing your credibility over. He is worth dying for. I truly believe that in my life, and I really hope that you'll believe that in yours. So thank you for taking time to listen and watch today. If you want to chat, please do. Like I said, my social medias will be up on the screen here, and you can engage in that way. But if you just want to leave a comment or share, I give you full power and authority to share this along with other people. And I just want to encourage you guys to be in his word, to be asking tough questions, and to work through all of it. Have a blessed day, everyone.